So first of all, I'd like to thank Lisa for having taken those 9 pages of close notes. My habit is not to take notes, and I'm delighted that she presented the map of the things that we heard. I want to approach it from a slightly different angle. So first of all, let me thank the organizers once again for the incredible diversity and energy that's in this room. And one of the things that I was struck by yesterday was just the very different sorts of places that people were coming from in their approaches to thinking about the issues that are before us at this meeting. So one of the themes that I think emerged very clearly is that nobody here at one level is committed to the idea of a single silver bullet. So I noted how over and over again people shied away from saying that there's a uniform characterization of these technologies as either all bad or all good, and people seemed prepared, not just John Carnan talking about balance, but others as well, to say that it a little bit depends on where you sit and which technology you're looking at, and so on and so forth. So that was interesting. Another interesting thing is that although several people talked about the gap between academics who think and activists who do, and how we need to find a common language to talk about how we approach the action world, the discourse in this room seems actually far more academic than what I, as an academic, would have thought would come out of the mouths of activists. So it was, to some degree, astonishing how often commodification came up. I didn't count in Lisa's own summary, but it reflected, in a way, the number of times that word came up. Reification came up. I mean, for God's sake, I don't know how many of my Harvard social science colleagues instantly understand what reification is. Discourse came up repeatedly. I don't think I heard state of exception, but maybe that was the state of exception. But anyway, so there is, at least among activists and academics who are talking about these issues, already a sort of discursive convergence going on, and I'm not sure what to make of that. So I tend to listen for what's not there as well as what is there. And I was struck that there seemed to be an incredible consensus on what the issues are. So, for instance, reproductive technologies, that we should care about those, came up a lot of the time. And the fact that associated technological interventions, such as things to do with harvesting eggs and egg sharing, came up as something that was already agreed upon as an agenda item that we should care about. Direct-to-consumer marketing, another thing that came up as something that people were already convinced was, quote, an issue, unquote. So in terms of issues that for people in the policy world often are at the beginning of a policy cycle, there seemed to be a lot of agreement in this room about what the issues are. Similarly, words like information and policy that I, sitting in a policy school, tend to think of as slightly technocratic terminology, that came up all the time. So people seem already to have a model in their minds about what's going on. We know what the issues are. There's a problem of information. There's a problem of getting to policy. Things that didn't come up as often were things like capital. Now, it was interesting that people talked about market but not capital. The word power didn't come up all that much. Even the word politics didn't come up all that much. And things like colonialism came up kind of at the margins. So that made me wonder about what sort of models of the public people are working with as they're thinking about the what is to be done question. What do we do when we get out of here, and how are we feeding this meeting into our own diverse agendas, whatever we're coming from? And I think I heard 3 models of the public, and I should thank my colleague Ben Herbert for pointing out one of these. So one of them, the first model of the public, is actually the same one that technocrats use all the time, the deficit model of the public, so-called, in which the public is assumed to be behaving in a problematic way because they lack information, and then our job becomes to provide the information that fills in the gap. The second model, and this is what Ben called attention to, is a sort of deficit 2 model, and this is the model of the ambivalent public, that they don't really know which way to jump. But that too is a kind of deficit model, because we just give them the right information so that they know how to jump the right way, but we know which way they should jump, in a sense. And then the third model of the public that I heard was the obfuscated public, which has information, but it's the wrong information because the wrong people have been giving them the information. And if we come in with the right information, then we will somehow make up for this gap in the public. But these are all different varieties of the deficit model. So if there's that much focus on giving people the right information so that they will either be not ignorant or not ambivalent or not obfuscated, then there's a real significance to our thinking about who the we are that are going to come in as knights in shining armor. And this is something that I'd like the discussion to go in for the rest of the day and a half to some extent. So from my standpoint, both as a scholar and as a person in the world, it's kind of important to recognize that it's not a public we're talking about, it's multiple publics. And then to fit that onto the fact that it's a cosmopolitan world and not an American world only, and not a Western world only. So there were occasional mentions of Africa, but Asia, with a rather sizable proportion of the world's people, just in demographic terms, is not actually sitting at most of these tables in any obvious sense. And when we talk about, what the younger generation will listen to or what they will buy into, it seems to me it's rather important to diversify our palette and be talking about which younger generations we're talking about. The privileged American market-driven and already commodified generations may not be prototypical of what there is out in the world. Occasional hints of this came through, as when somebody talked about the sleeping sickness remedy that didn't win a market till it became a hair loss remedy. I mean, underneath that example is a notion of what going more cosmopolitan in our thinking about publics might lead to. I want to leave at least this morning's reflections with a couple of skeptical observations. So if indeed we're talking about multiple publics and not a huge convergence of values underneath, and there were signs that people recognized this throughout the day or throughout the half day, because people said that there's no agreement on what the moral hazards are. Lena made this most plain in her putting of this as an intergenerational issue, that her generation will listen when the damages and harms are highly concrete and not moral. But we know from thinking about information and looking at information's role in the world that people actually don't buy things as information unless they've already agreed on the value parameters that make that information be the right information. So I think that that's where I'll leave it, about thinking about cosmopolitan publics maybe needing cosmopolitan informations and what that might look like. Thanks.